I'm here to wake you up, 'cause it's the end of September. It's the final week of the month, you know what that means. It's style study time. And look, I know, okay, I look tired and ill because I was ill this weekend, but yeah. But we're here and we're gonna grind through it because I don't take my own advice and take adequate breaks. And today's style study was requested by Discord member Ms. Rorel, who asked if I could make a video on Jet, or the JETTYJET show as he's known by everyone. And listen, I looked this guy up one time. And ever since then, his work has been haunting me because all I see on my Pinterest and my Instagram home recommended feeds anymore is JETTYJET shows. So this is a very exciting video for me to make. If you're a style study veteran, first of all, thank you for coming back. I love you, and you can go ahead and skip to part 1. The timestamps are in the video description, or you can find chapter markers on the seek bar below. But if you're new here, hi, welcome. We're gonna level up together, but first I kind of want to explain the structure of a style study so you kind of know what to expect today. Style Study is a series we do on the final week of every single month on my channel, where we take a look at some of our favorite contemporary artists, analyze their work, and see what we can learn from it. Keyword learn. We're not trying to copy anyone's work, just see if there are some tips and tricks that we can take from that work and apply to our own original style. I usually structure my style studies in 3 parts. In part 1, we'll take a look at Jet's work, analyze his style, and see what we can learn from it. Part 2 will be a study of one of Jet's original paintings. The reference I've chosen today is this one. And in part 3, we'll apply everything that we learned today to an original painting of our own. As always, if you do enjoy this video and find it helpful, then please let me know by giving it a big thumbs up and leave a comment below. Hit that subscribe button because there's loads more tutorials coming up on this channel every single week. And if you'd like to grab even more exclusive content, then check out my Patreon. The link is in the video description below. But I am anticipating this is going to be a long one. I can feel it in my spidey senses. So whenever you're ready, grab a snack, sit back, and let's dive into another style study featuring the JETTYJET show. The JETTYJET show, or Jet as I'll be referring to him through this video, is an American digital artist based in Sacramento, California. According to his Patreon, he's been drawing his whole life and went to art school in San Francisco, following which he started his YouTube channel. In 2016, he had his first table at an art convention, and to this day he puts out his work at Sac Anime, which is an anime expo in Sacramento. Obviously, his art is very semi-realistic, anime-esque, but there are so many unique characteristics to his work that make them very recognizable as JETTYJET paintings. And this gorgeous character art has garnered him over 90,000 subscribers here on YouTube and about just as many followers on Instagram and Twitter combined. To me, Jet's work looks like if you were to take a traditional manga and throw in a bunch of dimension. Like, the characters have all of the features of traditional manga characters, but with a tiny bit of realism injected into them. He almost exclusively paints female characters, and more often than not, these are very reminiscent of pin-up portraits with very simple or flat backgrounds. And on the surface, you might think these are straightforward semi-realistic portraits, but trust me when I say there is so much intentional design thinking behind these paintings, it's gonna blow your mind. Also, side note, don't you guys love how we always dedicate the final week of the month to style study, and it always is structured in the same way due to my type A tendencies? I suppose when it comes to style studies, I'm a bit of a ritualist. Here's a list of 5 key characteristics of Jet's work. Like I said a second ago, there are a lot of very intentional design choices that go into Jet's work right from the very beginning with the characters themselves. Because even when we go right to the basics and look at the proportions of the face, they are super cutesified like the faces you would see in a lot of manga. So you have large rounded eyes that are set quite wide apart and very low on the head. The nose and mouth are tiny and rounded, and the jaw is very narrow with a pointy chin. As we've seen time and time again on style studies, these are little ways in which artists mimic almost a baby-like head, causing the characters to look super young and naive and definitely very cute. But then you look at the rest of the character and that body is exaggerated in pretty much the exact opposite way. So instead of having a young childlike body to match the head, you have these super curvy proportions with large breasts, wide hips, a toned stomach, and plump rounded thighs, all traditional indicators of matured femininity. This contrast between the proportions of the face and the body is in no way subtle. Like, you can literally crop the two separate and on their own, the head and the body look different ages. So when you put the two together, you get this exaggerated dichotomy that instantly catches your eye because it's very rare in the real world for someone's face to appear that young while having a very grown-up body. In fact, even the way Jet poses the characters further exaggerates these contrast, because when you look at the face, you'll see a very innocent, almost deer in the headlights expression, but then the body is long and languid and curvy and graceful. And this, you guys, is peak feminine appeal in pop culture. It is this mix of sensuality and innocence that marks some of the most memorable feminine characters throughout the history of entertainment. At a quick glance, you'll notice that Jet renders the vast majority of the textures in his paintings to appear glossy, and you can tell that from all the specular highlights in most of these materials. Specular highlights are these spots of super bright white that bounce off the most reflective part of the surface, and you mostly only see them on super shiny or wet materials. So on perfect skin, for instance, adding a specular highlight makes it look super clean and shiny. As we just saw, the characters' faces often have this innocent naivete, so when you also pile on the specularity, it almost gives the skin a very pure appearance, as if the character is so youthful and hasn't been hurt or tainted by the world around them. Another instance in which you'll see specular highlights on the skin is when there is a bit of sweat, which would suggest a bit of physical activity, and that makes you wonder what the character got up to before they posed for this still frame. That definitely adds movement in terms of story. But like I said, a lot of the other materials have specular highlights too. The metal, for instance, is obviously going to be super reflective, so you see loads of light bouncing off of it. However, what surprised me is just how much glossiness you can see in the fabric too. Fabric is generally woven in such a way that the surface is often very irregular, so when light hits something like cotton or denim or burlap, it gets absorbed right into that weave pattern, and so you have a very matte appearance with almost no specular light. In other words, the surface isn't shiny enough to have specular highlights, except with one kind of fabric that is as shiny as it is smooth: silk. Historically, silk has been known to be a very expensive fabric that only the wealthiest could afford to wear. To this day, silk clothing is very rare and elite, so when Jet clothes them in fabric that is smooth and shiny, we as the viewers instinctively assume it is silk, and just like that, these characters are now very luxurious. So we've established that the skin is flawless and glossy, but there is this super soft blending to it that's almost reminiscent of watercolors, and here's why. First off, there aren't any super dark shadows on the face. That's not to say that there are no strong shadows on the face, because there often are, in that the shadow tone is very different to the mid-tone of the skin, but even the strongest of shadows are not dark. In contrast, however, you'll see that Jet does paint strong shadows in the clothing and sometimes even in the hair. Generally speaking, dark shadows often allude to secrecy and mystery, the proverbial shadow realm. So by playing with the shadows like this, Jet could be creating an effect where the face and the rest of the skin are very open and accessible since they have soft shadows, but then the clothing and the hair are quite the opposite. This effect is actually enhanced by the fact that the clothing is often super tight, almost like a second skin. You can literally see every rise and fall of the skin and the muscles underneath the fabric, even when the character is wearing a solid opaque bodysuit from their neck all the way down to their feet. And that's another appeal thing, because it gives you a sense of look at all of this body that you're not allowed to really look at. And there is nothing that captivates human beings more than what we cannot have. Coming back to the shadows, however, one thing I noticed is that Jet puts a lot of emphasis on the silhouette. You'll often notice that every character has a very well-defined outline, making them stand out strongly against the background. In fact, the values on the edges of the character are often opposite to the values in the background. So if a character has a lot of dark shadow tones, the background has very pale highlighty elements. If the character is blown very bright, the background will have darker values. It is a very strong compositional element and is the quickest and one of the most effective ways to bring attention to the character. Speaking of the character though, there is one very important thing that I want to mention about the shadows in the skin, and that is that these shadows are almost always super saturated. You'll notice that pretty much any ambient occlusion shadow is a warm dark orange, which is then surrounded by a lower saturation midtone. This creates the effect of enhanced subsurface scattering, which is when you get this soft red glow from the blood running underneath your skin. He'll often enhance this effect by throwing in either a cooler orange or a saturated blue or green shadow right next to the subsurface scattering, and it just adds a ton of color variation. Having visible subsurface scattering often makes it seem like the character has rather thin, delicate skin, which further exaggerates that sweet, innocent naivete that we've seen all this time. Alright, so if you've looked at any semi-realistic artist's work, you'll notice that they generally have an excellent command on hard and soft edges. Now, for the longest time, I had no idea what the secret formula was, because every time I tried to mess with hard and soft edges, it always turned out either too soft and lost the form, or it was too harsh and looked really rough. But then when I was looking at Jet's work, it hit me. There is a secret formula to it, and it is the easiest thing you could ever think of. Are you ready? When you have a bunch of midtones or a bunch of shadow tones next to each other, you want to blend the edges. But when you have an interface between a highlight and midtone, or midtone and shadow, that is where you keep a hard edge. So here, for instance, the cheeks are all rosy and soft, and he's blended all of the midtones together. But then you look at where the jaw transitions from midtone to shadow, and boom, hard edge. Here it's a little more subtle, but let's try it. So we have a very blue midtone that gradiates into orange, and that is a soft blend for the most part. But then you look at this area under the inner corner of the eye, and there's a hard edge there between that deep orange shadowy tone and that pale teal highlight. And the reason that this works is because soft edges indicate flat, expansive surfaces, whereas the hard edges show plane shifts in form. So if you guys try this technique out, keep in mind where the surface of the skin bends and creases and how the shadows would interact in those areas. If the shadow is surrounded by other shadow tones, that's a soft blend. If, however, it is surrounded by midtone or highlight, that's a hard edge. But why would he include this in his paintings? Remember how I told you that all of the surfaces seem to be shiny and specular? Well, when you do that, a lot of the times you tend to kind of lose separation between the types of surfaces. So cloth looks like hair, looks like skin, looks like metal because they're all shiny. So in order to create a strong distinction between the materials, Jet instead uses the interplay of hard and soft edges to differentiate them. It is the proportions of the hard and soft edges that help separate the textures from each other. So anything that is super reflective, such as metal, latex, or plastic, will have way more hard edges because none of that light is absorbed. It is all reflected off the surface. But anything with a more matte textured surface causes the majority of the light to be absorbed and diffused within the material and reflect way less. As a result, those edges appear to be very soft and diffused. So more hard edges equals a shiny surface and more soft edges equals a more matte surface. And just like that, you have separation between materials. Genius. Looking at Jet's work, you'll often find that he preserves most of the line art, and this is actually very reminiscent of traditional manga or anime, where you have very solid line art that adds definition to what would otherwise be very soft, low contrast shading. However, like we've seen a couple of times already, Jet doesn't like to create very dark shadows in a lot of the scene, especially not in or around the face. So having solid black line art around the face would be entirely too harsh. That's not to say none of the line art is black, because you'll definitely see that around the silhouette or in the clothing, where he's going for that sharp, well-defined look. But for the skin, hair and other softer materials, Jet often paints over the line art with colours that are very similar to the local colour. So for the nose, for example, he'll pick a colour that is a few tones darker than the surrounding skin, light enough to not stand out too starkly, but dark enough that it is visible and adds definition. You want the line art to hold up the structure of the form without looking completely out of place. So to sum up part 1 of this study, here are the 5 characteristics to Jet's work. Number 1, he creates strong characters by exaggerating the innocence of the face as well as the voluptuous curves of the body. This contrast captivates the viewer and really appeals to the traditional feminine archetype in pop culture. 2. The majority of the materials on the character is painted to be glossy, creating a very pure, shiny appearance, as if the characters are unhurt by the world around them. Number 3, the shadows on the skin are saturated but never super dark, though you do see very dark shadows in the clothing. This echoes the sweet innocence of the face, further pushing the contrast between pure and mysterious. 4. Jet uses soft and hard edges to differentiate between matte and reflective materials, thereby adding texture to the painting while still preserving the uniformity of it all. And number 5, he colors his line art to be a few shades darker than the surrounding colors so as to add definition without it looking completely out of place. However, he does have a very solid outline around the character to make the silhouette stand out strong against the background. For the study today, this is the beautiful reference that I've chosen. This is a fan art of Rei Ayanami from Neon Genesis Evangelion. I have no idea what any of that means. I don't watch anime, but she's super cute and it felt simple enough to do a quick study while complex enough to cover all of the points from part 1. Technically, this is a close cropped part of a bigger painting, but allow it, okay? So a couple of challenges I instantly faced. First, the eyes. The way Jet renders them is very complex, at least from what I can gather from the end product. You guys know I don't watch these artists actually paint step by step, I only go off the end product for this series. And the eyes here are simultaneously soft and hard-edged. What tripped me up was that the eye shape had a sharp corner on the outside but a softer rounded inner rim. This is kind of backwards to how I normally paint eyes, so it definitely got to me. The rest of the face was quite alright. It's mostly large, expansive planes with the occasional super saturated shadow and form. The armor was the same, loads of flat, expansive planes and the occasional saturated shadow. But where I really struggled was with the hair. Here's the thing. Just like the face, the hair has loads of expansive planes and smaller saturated shadows. However, the form of the hair isn't quite as intuitive. With the face, for instance, I had lines in the sketch that told me where the shadows were to go. With the hair, there are lines, but they don't indicate form whatsoever, just the occlusion shadows. As you can guess, having to figure out where the shadows go, then adjusting the values, then changing up the colors to add a purple tint, and then redoing the lines, it was, yeah. I did later go back while editing and turn down the contrast a little just to match the original better, because that is a mistake that I make pretty much every style study. So with that said, here is the finished study for today. So today I want to go back to trying another Draw This in Your Style challenge, and we're going to be painting this character by Sarah, who goes by the name The Ugly Drama over on Instagram. I love doing these challenges, you guys, because these characters have so many details that I would never even have thought of putting on my own characters. And I find that this is the best way to test if you've really learned from a style study, is to apply the artist's style to another artist's character. It's like styleception. This time, however, I decided to just go ahead and paint over all of the lines and then add them back in towards the end. And let me tell you, I faced the same exact struggle with this painting as I did with the study. The eyes, man, I have no idea what it is about them, but I just could not get them to work for me. You'll see me hop in and out of the liquefy window, just readjusting and repositioning the eyes constantly. Even on the end product, I'm still not sure about the eyes. Everything else seemed to go swimmingly, though I did have issues with the pose looking a bit too stiff, but that's just me. A lot of the character though is in the person's eyes, and dear lord, I could not get them quite right. I also started out with tiny lips, but it felt like it took away too much from the character design, so I did end up sizing them a lot bigger than Jet usually does. And this time around I preempted the hair struggle and drew in way more lines than I had with the study, making sure that I knew exactly where my shadows were going. When it came to the background, I wanted to have something that was plain enough to not take away from the character, but detailed enough that it didn't just look like a flat white. And I decided to go with the idea that she might be lying in bed with her book and her lizard. So that's kind of the route I went with, painting in these giant folds to make it look like a rumpled bedsheet. I had to cut this speed paint short because this video is already entirely too long, but if you guys want to check it out, I will link the completed speed paint that's up on my Patreon up in the card somewhere. But after a lot of adjusting and readjusting, here is today's original painting, Nova. And there we have it, the JETTYJET show demystified. Massive thank you again to Ms. Arel on Discord for requesting this video. I hope you enjoyed it and that it's been everything you've been looking for. And if the rest of you guys have enjoyed this video and found it helpful as well, then please do let me know by giving it a big thumbs up and hitting that subscribe button below. If you have any other artists you'd like to see on this series in the future, leave them in the comments below as well, because I will add it to my list, which is just getting longer by the day. And if this is your very first style study and you'd like to see more, I will leave a very bingeable playlist up here in the outro for your viewing pleasure. I promise every single one of them is super helpful and you will learn a lot from every single one of my style studies, so check that out up there. But with all of that said, thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I know it was a bit of a long one, but I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Bye!